Hello again, and welcome to George's Path Through Improvisation. I'm George Dracomi. I've created this video lesson for those pianists who play pretty well by reading music written in treble and bass clef, but need some help understanding jazz chord symbols. In a jazz ensemble, a piano player, along with a bass player and drummer, form the rhythm section, which delivers rhythmic pulse as well as provide background harmony, which is where the ability to play by chord symbols comes in. Now sometimes a jazz piano chart will contain both chord symbols and written notes, but oftentimes you'll see chord symbols only. Now in that last example, I was playing a chordal accompaniment, which is known as comping for short, using the more advanced 9th, 11th, and 13th chords. They sound pretty good, but can look pretty intimidating if you're just getting started. But here's the good news. Those complex chords can be reduced down to simple two-note chords and still sound good for comping. In that last example, I reduced those 9th, 11th, and 13th chords down to their simple underlying two-note structures, which are called 3/7 chords. Three 7 chords are a great place to begin the study of chord symbols for three reasons. 1, they're easy to learn. 2, they quickly provide good chordal accompaniment, or comp, for jazz ensemble. And 3, they are the foundation upon which more complex jazz chords are built. So let's take a closer look at 3/7 chords and see how and why they work. To begin with, jazz chords and scales primarily fall into these three categories: sevenths, minor sevenths, and major sevenths. And it's the 7th chord and the 7th scale that are the foundation and starting point for all other jazz chords and scales. We say that because if you take a look at this list of common jazz chord symbols, you'll find that the simplest, most basic one of all is the 7th chord symbol, which contains just a letter and the number 7. When it comes to jazz chord symbols, you can't get any more basic or bare bones than that, which again is why we recognize the 7th chord and the 7th scale as the foundation and starting point for all other jazz chords and scales. As we move forward, it's important that we regard the 7th scale as a pure, unedited scale, which contains a root, 2nd, 3rd, 4th, 5th, 6th, 7th, and octave. The 7th scale sounds almost like the major scale that we all learn in classical theory, but with one difference. The major scale contains a major 7th, while the 7th scale contains simply a 7th, which is 1/2 step lower than the major 7th. Now classical theory calls this the major 7th and this the minor 7th. Chord symbol theory also regards this as the major 7th, but this as simply the 7th. Not the minor 7th or the lowered 7th, but simply the 7th. Also, classical theory calls this the major 3rd and this the minor 3rd. Well, chord symbol theory also regards this as the minor 3rd, but this as simply the 3rd. Root, 2nd, 3rd. So when working with chord symbols, it's very important to remember that the term minor is used only to describe a lowered third, and the term major is used only to describe a raised seventh. So we have a third and a minor third, a seventh, and a major seventh. Now if we go back to the C7 scale, which is our foundation and starting point, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, and play the odd numbered tones only, 1, 3, 5, and 7, C, E, G, and B flat, we get a C7th chord. Chords are formed by playing the odd numbered tones of scales, 1, 3, 5, 7. Now when a lowercase m or mi, min, or simply a minus sign is inserted into a C7 chord symbol, it tells us to do one and only one thing. And that is to take the basic C7 chord, C, E, G, and B flat, and lower the third by 1/2 step to a minor third, which then gives us a C minor 7th chord, C, E flat, G, and B flat. In the same way, when an MAJ or capital M or capital MA or a triangle is inserted into a C7 chord symbol, it tells us to do one and only one thing. And that is to take the basic C7 chord, C, E, G, B flat, and raise the 7th by 1/2 step to the major 7th, which then gives us a C major 7 chord, C, E, G, B natural. So we now have our three primary categories of jazz chords. 7th chords, 1, 3, 5, 7. Minor 7th chords, 1, minor 3, 5, 7. And major 7th chords, 1, 3, 5, major 7. Now let's play those three chord types using only the 1 and the 5. Here's the 7th chord. Here's the minor 7th chord. And here's the major 7th chord. No difference. But if we play those same three chord types, but this time using only the 3 and the 7, here's the 7th chord. Here's the minor 7th chord. And here's the major 7th chord. We can hear that it makes all the difference. 7th, minor 7th, major 7th. There are no two tones that are more important in making the distinction between the three primary chord types, 7ths, minor 7ths, and major 7ths, than the 3 and the 7. Although the sound of the chord is enhanced by adding 9s, 11s, and 13s, they're not as important as the 3 and 7, which is why they can be left out when we make these chord reductions. Now it's not that the 1st and 5th tones of our basic 7th chord are unimportant. The opposite is true. They're at the foundation of all three chord types. But the distinction between all three chord types can be made only when the 3rd and the 7th are included. 7ths, minor 7ths, major 7ths. In a jazz ensemble, the bass player will create bass lines where the 1 and 5 are prominent. And then when the piano player adds the 3 and 7, the complete chord comes together. Also, it makes for good rhythm section teamwork when a bass player and piano player stay out of each other's way and focus on playing their particular chord tones, with 1s and 5s in the bass line and 3s and 7s in the piano comp. So if you're a pianist who is new to jazz ensemble charts with chord symbols, you can begin by taking each chord and reducing it down to its 3/7 chord. Now, as we move forward, it's important to remember that the minor seventh and major seventh 3/7 chords are formed by making adjustments to the basic 3/7 chord, which is what you'll always have to figure out first. And here's the easiest and most accurate way to do that. To determine the basic 3/7 chord, you simply start with the root tone, which is the letter name of the chord, and then count half steps. In this example, we'll use F as our root tone. Now counting up 4 half steps, 1, 2, 3, 4, gives us the third, which is A. And then counting down 2 half steps, 1, 2, gives us the seventh, which is E flat. We now have the basic 3/7 chord for F, A and E flat, which is the foundation for the other types of F jazz chords. Accuracy means everything when determining the basic 3/7 chord, so it's very important to always think of the root as 0 and then count moves in half steps. Let's do one more and find the basic 3/7 chord for C. Now we think of the root C as 0 and then count up 1, 2, 3, 4 half steps, which gives us the third, E. And then count down 2 half steps from the root C, which is 0, 1, 2, which gives us the seventh, B flat. So the basic 3/7 chord for C is E and B flat. Once you determine the basic 3/7 chord, all you need to do then is to look and see if the chord symbol contains information that changes the third or the seventh, and simply ignore the rest of the information. A lowercase m, mi, min, or a minus sign all mean minor, and tell us to lower the third by 1 half step. And an MAJ, capital M, capital MA, or triangle all mean major, and tell us to raise the seventh by 1 half step. Now, let's go back to that original chord progression that we played at the beginning of this video and reduce the first chord, F major 9, down to its particular 3/7 chord. We start by ignoring everything else but the F and counting half steps. 4 half step moves above F, 1, 2, 3, 4, gives you an A, which is the third. And 2 half step moves below F, 1, 2, gives you E flat, which is the seventh. So the basic 3/7 chord of F is A and E flat, which is our foundation and starting point. Next, we need to look at the chord symbol to see whether it contains information that would cause us to make an adjustment to our basic 3/7 chord. Remember, a lowercase m tells us to lower the third by 1 half step, and an MAJ tells us to raise the seventh by 1 half step. And of course, if there's neither a lowercase m or MAJ, we simply leave the basic 3/7 chord as is. As you can see, this chord symbol contains an MAJ, which means that we have to take F's basic 3/7 chord, A and E flat, and raise the seventh, E flat, up 1 half step to E natural, which is the major seventh. Therefore, the F major 9 chord can be reduced to an A and an E, which we'll place in parentheses right next to the chord, with the 3 at the bottom and the 7 at the top. You'll eventually be able to do all of this in your head, but for now, write out the 3/7 reductions and place them in parentheses right next to the chord symbol, just as we did here, with the 3 at the bottom and the 7 at the top. Let's go through the process one more time with the second chord, which is an E minor 7 with a flat 5. It looks complex, but again, we'll begin by ignoring everything but the E, which is the root tone, and count half-step moves to determine the basic 3/7 chord for E. Think of E as 0, and then 1, 2, 3, 4 half-step moves up gives us a G sharp, and 0, 1, 2 half-step moves down gives us a D. So the basic 3/7 chord for E is G sharp and D. When we go back to the chord symbol, we notice that there's a lowercase m, which means that we have to lower the third, which is G sharp, down 1 half step to G. Therefore, the E minor 7 flat 5 chord can be reduced to a G and a D, which we'll place in parentheses to the right of the chord, again putting the 3 at the bottom and the 7 at the top. And we'll repeat this process with the rest of the chords in the progression. Now, before we play these 3/7 chords, we need to remember two things. First, they need to be kept in a good range for accompaniment, or comp, which is right in the middle of the piano, making sure the right hand upper limit is around 4th space E, treble clef, and the right hand lower limit is the B flat below middle C. Then once we figure out the right hand 3/7 chord movement, we'll double it with the left hand 1 octave lower. The second thing to remember is to make sure that the 3/7 chords move smoothly from one to another. Chordal accompaniment that jumps all over the place is very distracting, so our goal is to move as little as possible. You can think in terms of having to pay moving charges, with a half-step move costing 50 cents, a whole step move costing $1, and no charge for common tones. I transferred all of the chords and their 3/7 reductions in parentheses to a blank staff so that we can notate the 3/7 chords in the treble clef for the right hand. Remember, we need to keep them in good range and move them from one to another smoothly. You'll find that jazz standard chord progressions most often descend from right to left on the keyboard. So it'll be best to start our F major 9 3/7 chord higher on the staff with the 4th space E on the top instead of the A. This will give us room to descend and still stay in good comp range before we bottom out and have to reset up. Now as we go to the E minor 7 flat 5's 3/7 chord, G and D, we want to move as little as possible, and the shortest distance is from the E to the D, which is a whole step, $1, and from the A to the G, another whole step, giving us a total moving charge of $2. As we move to the third chord, whose 3/7 reduction is a C sharp and G, we find our first set of common tones, G to G, no charge, and a D moving to a C sharp, which is a half-step move, 50 cents, making the total cost 50 cents. Then into the fourth chord, C and F, 1.5 step total, costing $1.50. And so on, keeping the moving charges to a minimum as we descend smoothly through the progression. Now when we hit bottom with the B flat below the staff at measure 9, we simply invert the G minor 7 chord halfway through the measure, back up to the higher 3/7 voicing with the B flat on top, and then continue with smooth voice leading to the end. Now let's play it through, doubling it an octave lower with the left hand. And once more with bass and drums, and this time giving our 3/7 chord comp more of a jazz feel. You'll eventually be able to do all of these 3/7 spellings in your head. But for now, when you come across a jazz ensemble piano chart, take each chord one at a time and go through the process. First, we determine the basic 3/7 chord by counting half steps from the root, which in this case is a G. 1, 2, 3, 4 half steps up gives us the third, which is B. 2 half steps down gives us the 7, which is F. So our basic 3/7 chord for G is B and F. Next, we make adjustments according to the information in the chord symbol. Here we have a lowercase m, so we'll lower the third, which is B, to B flat. So the 3/7 chord reduction for G minor 9 is B flat and F, which we'll place in parentheses right next to the chord. 3 on the bottom and 7 on the top. Once you're finished filling in the rest of the 3/7 reductions, practice them slowly with both hands in octaves. Remember to stay in good comp range and keep the moving charges to a minimum. You'll find that many of the 3/7 reductions flow closely from one to another as they descend to the left, like these first three chords, G minor 7 to C7 to F major 7. But when you have to make a jump, like from this F major 7's A and E to the D7's F sharp and C, jump to the right and reset your comp higher so you have room to descend. If I had jumped to the lower F sharp and C, I would have bottomed out sooner as I move forward. So jumping to the right is always better. When working with jazz piano charts, you'll find that most chords fall into the three basic categories: sevenths, minor sevenths, and major sevenths. However, there are 3 additional chord types that I'd like to quickly go over with you before we conclude. There's no need to memorize them because they're included in my chord conversion chart, which I'll show you how to find and print out from my website. The first additional chord type is the diminished 7th chord, which has a dim 7 or a circle 7 in the chord symbol. So when we see a C diminished 7th chord, for example, we'll start with the basic 3/7 of C, which is E and B flat, and then lower them both. The third goes to the minor third, and the 7th goes to the diminished 7th. E flat, B double flat. Now earlier we talked about the first 2 types of sevenths, the basic 7th and the major 7th. Well, now we have our third type of 7th, which is the diminished 7th. 7th, diminished 7th. So again, when you see a DIM7 or a circle 7 in a chord symbol, or sometimes just a DIM or a circle without the 7, go ahead and lower both the 3rd and the 7th by 1/2 step. When you see a circle with a slash, however, it means half diminished 7th, which is exactly the same as a minor 7 flat 5 chord. With those, we keep the basic 7th and lower the 3rd to a minor 3rd. The second type of additional chords includes 11th chords and those chords which contain a sus4, such as 7 sus4, 9 sus4, and 13 sus4 chords. With those types, you'll play a 4th instead of a 3rd, so the 2-note reduction for a C11 or C7 sus4 chord will be an F and a B flat, a 4 and a 7, instead of a 3 and a 7. With minor 11s, however, we'll use our normal process, which is to determine the basic 3/7 and lower the 3rd. So the 2-note reduction for a C minor 11th as well as a C minor 9 or C minor 13 chord will be a minor 3rd and a 7th, E flat and B flat. We also use the normal process for chords containing a sharp 11. So for example, a C major 9 sharp 11 chord will be reduced to a 3rd and a major 7th, which is an E and a B natural. And finally, with our third type of additional chords, which are those which contain a 6, 6/9, or just a single letter, you'll simply play a 3rd along with the 6th instead of the 7th. So the 2-note reduction for a C6, C6/9, or just plain C chord is an E and an A, 3 and a 6. Now, as mentioned before, I created a chord conversion chart which lists these additional types of jazz chords and explains how to reduce them. The chart is part of an entire PDF packet which also contains jazz progression worksheets, so you can practice doing these 3/7 reductions. Answer sheets are also included so you can check your work. You can get it by visiting my website at georgespath.com, where you'll first click on Samples in the menu, then select Piano Keyboard, scroll to page 116, then click on the PDF and print it out. As mentioned before, you'll eventually be able to do the 3/7 chord reductions in your head, which is especially useful when sight reading new jazz ensemble charts. It also works with jazz fake books, which are often used when playing in small combos. And remember that the 3/7 chord is at the foundation of the more advanced chords. Subscribe to my course and you'll learn how by going to the lessons on comping, which start at page 117. You'll find that it's easier to do than you might think. Also, if you like this video, let me know, and please share it with others who you think might find it useful. And again, check out my course at georgespath.com. Hope to hear from you soon.